Have you ever felt so dreadful that no matter how much you don't believe in ghosts or paranormal phenomenons, you started to have doubts? No matter how much you told yourself that, it's just an animal, a random sound in the ether, your mind would question that. Have you ever saw something so normal or mundane, like a toy, a tree, a piece of furniture, but darkness and loneliness would makes it so much more than it is? Have you ever felt a dark pull towards it, no matter how much you were afraid? Why do we have this strange pull towards dread? Why do we watch horror movies? Why do we play horror games? Fear of the unknown is one of the basic causes of our dread. But in the unknown is a discovery of something new, something that no one before us have ever saw. And the combination of those two is what creates a concoction of masterful horror. Let me tell you my horror story. So, I was 18 years old, and I remember that I just finished high school. I had plenty of free time. And I had a girlfriend that was living pretty far away from where I was living, and I was like, I didn't want to spend, even more time with my parents. I was like a kid who was sick of his parents. I finally wanted to be free. So I decided to go to her, and I spent a couple of weeks. I spent like 2 weeks with her. We had a lot of fun. But there was this one moment, one event that really ingrained into my mind. So she was one of those people who would have very crazy ideas out of the sudden. Like, let's say we were just watching a movie. We just finished watching a movie. It was like 2 a.m., let's say. And she would be like, yeah, instead of going to sleep, let's go to that lake that is like 6 kilometers away from here and watch the moon in the coastline of this lake, because that's what she wanted to do. She would be that kind of person, right? And I'm not saying that it is something bad. I actually really like that trait about her. But there was one day that she had one of her moments again, and it was like late afternoon, right? So it's late afternoon, and she was like, let's watch the sunset in the forest, like in the wilderness, right? And we decided to buy some booze, drink some booze and watch the sunset with some nice nature around us. And we decided to go like really deep into the forest, into like the wilderness of the forest, specifically because drinking in public here is illegal. We could get a fine. She was also 17-year-old, and in Poland you can drink from 18 years old, so that would also have create a lot of problems for her. So we spent like an hour like wandering around this forest, finding like a really good place to just sit, drink some booze, have some fun time together, if you know what I mean, and watch the sunset. And this forest had a lot of elevation, like sometimes the ground would go up and down and up and down. It was very hilly, and we found like a really nice place where the ground will just go up like this. It was like a cliff in the middle of the forest. So we sat there in this cliff, and there was like this very beautiful scene when there was like this small valley in the middle of the forest in front of us, and then the sun was setting. It was just from like a romance movie or something. And it was a very romantic evening we had. It was really nice. It was just like from a romance novel. But there was a problem. The sun was setting, and we were really deep inside the forest, like deep into the wilderness. And we found that place after like an hour of just wandering around. So you might see where this is going. Because that's exactly what I thought at that time. Like we saw that the sun is just like, it's setting, it's actually getting really dark very quickly. And I'm like, it's getting a bit dark, And she even said to me that it sounds like a beginning of a horror movie, which yeah, it was kind of. So we decided to move our asses very quickly and just try to look for the way back. The problem was that We didn't knew about that place. We found it by accident, by just stumbling around it, walking around and looking for it for like an hour. It was also back in the day where there were no iPhones. We didn't have a GPS in our phones. There was no flashlight option in our phones. So we were screwed. Also, we drank quite a lot. So, booze gives you like -50 to your navigation. Long story short, we were lost. Very quickly, we lost ourselves in the middle of this forest because the sun set and then the darkness came. The thing was that nature really hated us, and then clouds also covered the sky. So not only it was dark because it's the night, the moon shining through the sky couldn't help us with its light. So it was pitch black. It was like complete darkness. For you to understand how dark it was, I could have my hand like this and I wouldn't see it. I wouldn't see my hand. So we were wandering around. We were basically holding hands with my girlfriend. We were holding hands, and finally it was so dark that we were barely able to see each other, and we were like, we just need to sit down and wait. Like, what will you do in the middle of the forest where there is no like clear path, when there's a lot of bushes and grass and trees? And that night was the most terrifying night that I had in my life. We were sitting in the middle of the forest, darkness, pitch black. We were, a bit boozed up, and weird sounds started to come from every direction. Some very normal, like cracking of a branch or probably a bird or something like that. But we started hearing noises and sounds that we never heard before. And you might say like you don't believe in ghosts and all of that stuff, but if you are not really into wilderness and you don't know which animal what sounds make, like your mind, especially with alcohol, starts being very creative, and your mind is creating a lot of very terrifying thoughts. We also decided to not talk to each other because any sound will basically attract whatever might be also with us in this dark forest. At one point even, there was a situation where I started hearing footsteps. Like, it sounded like footsteps, not like animal walking, not like a dog or something. Like, it sounded like someone was walking, like a human. That's at least how it sounded for me. And that sound was getting closer and closer, and I started hearing someone's, breath, like someone is taking breath like that. But it was not my girlfriend. My girlfriend was constantly next to me on my left. So I knew that if I hear anything directly from my left, it's her. That was like that direction. And it was very close. Like, I don't know how close it was, but it was dark, but I would say like 10 meters, 5 meters away from me. I heard like breathing, heavy breathing. And then whatever that was just decided to walk off. It was such a terrifying moment that it was probably an animal, but I wouldn't know that. I don't know how much time we spent. The time passes very slowly. Like, I felt like an eternity is passing in this horrific place. Of course, finally the sun rose up and we could finally go home, but man, that was a terrifying experience. Darkwood is my favorite horror game I have ever played, and you can guess why based on the story that I just told you. But my experience with a literal Darkwood is not the only reason. Like all good horror games, Darkwood does not have any jump scares, at least intentional jump scares. But let's explore that for a moment. Why jump scares are not a staple of good horror? Jump scares are very cheap and very easy to execute, and they are not scary. Not because I am this tough guy who is not scared of them, but because they do not rely on fear. When you jump in a jump scare, you are not actually afraid. You can be scared for a moment, but that's because of your body's instinctive reaction to danger and unexpected event. Your survival instinct kicks in, but once you see it and realize you are not under a threat, you are eased off, right? You can see that with pranks. People have their flight, fight, or freeze moment, but it's not like they are scared for the rest of the night because of that event. And the more you get scared by a jump scare, the less and less reaction you will have towards it, as it's no longer so unexpected. Suddenly you will start to expect that something unexpected will happen. The first thing that Darkwood excels at is localized world building. And now I know that you may ask yourself like what I'm talking about, because whenever you hear world building, whenever anyone hear about world building, they think about creating kingdoms, fantasy universe and magic and all of that stuff. But world building is actually everything around the plot of your story. So in my previous video called How to Create Worlds, I talk about two major type of world building, which is globalized world building and localized world building. Globalized is basically you create everything, right? You create the backstory of your races, of this entire universe, like the pantheon of gods, and all of those things. Localized is basically when you want to tell a story, a self-contained story, and you want to basically make just the world building around your story and not go anywhere else. Just the necessary things around your story. Darkwood builds its dread on a foundation of a believable world that is twisted and corrupted by the force of nature. What I actually really love is something that is very much underused and underappreciated, which is a map. Maps, in the vast majority of games, are just a tool of convenience to not make the player feel bad when they are lost, and to also put quest markers on. But in Darkwood, the map is an item that your characters have, right? And it's not like a military map with a GPS or something. No, it's just a drawing on a piece of paper. The very basic symbols for landmarks and, a rough estimation of where things are and how big the area is. But that's pretty much it. Your character don't know anything about the area, and neither do you. It's such a great piece of world building, making you, the player, connected more with your character. When you walk around the world of Darkwood, you understand that this place was lived in. You see traces of culture and how people probably existed in this place. You can piece out the story of what might have happened based on the environmental storytelling. The areas that we played in was probably a countryside, which it's obvious based on the farming equipment everywhere, actual farms, and we also find a actually functioning village. But then, for example, you find abandoned tanks, trucks with military equipment, and some heavy ordnance in this remote countryside. Since we know of the underground complex hidden in one of the houses, which is explained in the very beginning of the game, we might assume, for example, that this area was being evacuated, and in the guise of this operation, maybe the military or someone from higher ups was trying to sneak into this complex. You see a couple of places that were completely burned out, which also suggests that maybe that was the first reaction, the first response people had fighting this overgrowth. The point I'm trying to make here is that Darkwood is great at obfuscating what truly happened, but in the same time giving you enough that that there is a history to this place. I'm pretty sure that the devs actually created a story for it, but decided to never fully tell it, which is a very brave move, because if you create something, it feels bad to not include it in your story. You create stories for other people to enjoy, and purposefully hiding something requires bravery and faith in your audience. This is something I tend to disagree with other people in my space when they talk about mysteries. Yes, explaining how a monster or a ominous power works exactly will absolutely kill the aura of mystery around it. However, Inventing the exact rules and inventing ways that something work and then purposefully never fully reveal it to your audience is a very, very powerful, because not only it makes it more believable, it gives it more depth, because people will actually notice that there is far more than it is shown. And the biggest fan of your work will absolutely love it and appreciate it. And in horrors, hiding and obfuscating is key for creating the feeling of unease. The second thing is music and sound. But T, I write a book, a story. I don't make a movie or a video game. I cannot add sound or music there, I hear you say. Well, Mr. Convenient Strawman, that's okay, because we are not talking purely about music and sound, but what those things accomplish and how we can use different tools to achieve the same or at least similar results. Sound design and music plays a huge part on creating a sense of dread. Just like with the story that I told you in the beginning, just sound, well, or the lack of it, can be crucial to building horror. Music, however, music is something entirely different. Music exists to build certain emotions in you, to enhance the experience by manipulating your emotions. Sad music makes you sad, happy music makes you happy, you know what I mean. Darkwood have plenty of moody, atmospheric soundtrack, which, you will hear during this video. But there is something that I want to show you. In Darkwood, when evening comes, you need to hide and prepare for the horrors of the night. The night becomes very supernatural. It is peak dread. You never know what it will have for you. The nights are definitely the scariest part of the game, where your hideout is invaded by forces unknown, and you have absolutely no idea what is happening. And during that night, slowly, when morning is just around the corner, the music gives you this a little bit of extra suspense. What the music does here is absolutely fantastic. It gives you this small building sense of hope, because the morning is just around the corner. You need to survive just a little bit longer, and then it releases your emotions. The morning came. You are safe. Normally in music, especially you can see that in techno, it builds and builds a suspense and then release it. You can feel a catharsis, a sense of fulfillment from that release. Darkwood builds it for a little bit too long to feel comfortable, and if you add the stress of the night to it, it makes for a very, very emotional experience. And as I said in the beginning, you can achieve that without music. Horror is effective when it's not overused, but building a sense of dread during a scene and prolonging it for just a little bit too long to be comfortable, you can achieve a similar result. I believe Amnesia: The Dark Descent did that really well without music. The game specifically removes enemies from an area if you died recently, so you are not used to their presence, and you can feel a bit eased off, but in the same time tense, because you as a player, you don't know that. You are never fully sure if this enemy is still here, and the game might very quietly hint to you that there might still be someone around here, even though the game specifically removed the enemy. Fear of the unknown is the absolute basic of any horror story that you want to talk about. Like, you hear about it every single time you hear about horrors, right? And yes, that is correct. I will not be a contrarian, at least not in this specific case. But there is something that people usually don't talk about when discussing writing horror stories, is the fear of the known. Contrary to the fear of the unknown, fear of the known is basically taking something very simple and mundane, a object, a simple toy or something like that, something that is very common and you don't really think it's scary, and making it scary. I remember when I first time stumbled upon this concept is when I was reading Junji Ito's manga. If you never read this manga, like if you love horror, Junji Ito's manga is absolutely terrifying. It's really good. So if you don't know who he is a master of taking something very mundane, something very simple, like a cat, a chair, a hole in the wall, and make it absolutely terrifying. I still remember till this day when I first time read one of his story, and I was terrified of balloons. Yes, of fucking balloons. The fear of the known is a very powerful concept that does not require you to go that deep into the, fantastical and paranormal, which, if you go too far with those concepts, you can very easily mismanage it and kill the sense of dread. In Darkwood, we have the woods, the forest. The forest by itself is a scary place, especially during the night. But Darkwood goes much further with it. It animates it. It gives it a sense of collective will, as if all the trees are working as one. Sure, you have your rabid dogs, your monsters, and other mutations trying to get you, and they are the immediate threat. But, especially during the night, it seems like the forest itself is trying to destroy you. It is the trees that devour everything slowly. It is the trees that mutate people horribly. It is the trees that stand in your way all the time. The forest itself is the looming, uncaring force that you need to deal with. All the monsters and wildlife and other things standing in your way are just the offspring, those that were touched by the forest. Darkwood takes something normal, a forest in this case, and makes it the horror. Escalating the power levels to cosmic proportion can work in horror. You can see that, for example, with Lovecraft's work. But that requires finesse and proper management to invoke the sense of dread without overusing it. But by taking simple things, you can build dread and horror without reaching into the dangerous territory of endless power scaling. Horror is actually one of the more difficult types of story that you can tell, because you don't only need to write a story and remember about all those things that you usually do, but at the same time you need to be very careful about managing your audience emotional state. I'm not that big of a fan of the concept of pacing, especially if you are making a medium that does not have a expected length. Let's say you write a book, you can make a 20-page story, or you can make a 200-page story, right? But with horrors, pacing is actually extremely important because, as I said previously, you need to very carefully manage the emotional state of your audience, of someone who is reading your story, and you as a creator need to constantly detach yourself from being a creator and think more like your audience would think. Well, here you go, a very, very late Halloween video. I was very busy in the last 2 weeks, and I hope I will manage to hop back into my schedule now with releasing one video a week, maybe even more. I actually have some plans about that, but you will see. I hope that you found value in this content, and if this type of content is something that appeals to you, please consider subscribing for more similar things. And yeah, remember that you are always just one page, one chapter away from creating a great story.